Dynamic business leader. Ladies and gentlemen, it is my privilege in reading out his small profile to you. Manish is currently the chairman and co-founder of Team Lease Services, India's largest temporary staffing firm. The 4-year-old firm has now 70,000 employees in 770 cities and towns across India. Never heard of. Earlier, he co-founded JYLF, an HR outsourcing company in 1996 that was acquired by Hewitt Associates in 2002, and consequently, he was the managing director of Hewitt Outsourcing Asia and Singapore. Manish is a member of Prime Minister's Council on Skill Development, and for those of you guys, I know you're all young and aspiring to do your MBA soon. He got his MBA from the Wharton School. Today I requested him to come by in here to talk to us about his journey in making Team Lease such a huge success, and if there are tips and messages for each one of us, what could they be? Ladies and gentlemen, at the end of this presentation of Manish, we'll have Q&A. At this point in time, would I please request all of you to put your hands together and welcome on stage Manish Sabharwal.
When Rahul asked me to come here and talk about my journey, I always have two problems with these kind of sessions. The first problem is it sounds like I did it, you know, but 90% of what we've done at Team Lease is being in the right place at the right time, and for me, actually having a bunch of very smart co-founders, maybe smarter than me. The second problem I have is it sounds like I knew what I was doing. You know, life is lived forward but understood backwards. You may be too young to realize that. But anyway, there'll be two parts of what I'm going to try and explain to you, and I'm going to try and give you the lessons of entrepreneurship. Hopefully just hang them on my journey, but the more important part is the lessons of entrepreneurship. And second is I thought about, you know, what are the 5 things I wish I knew 20 years ago? You know, a baby and a dwarf. A baby and a dwarf are both small, but the baby is going to grow while the dwarf is going to stay there. The difference between a baby and a dwarf is not more food. It is not more money. It is really in DNA and in architecture. And I've had the unique luck of creating 2 ventures since when I finished business school in 1996. So my first venture was a company called JYLF. It was my final project in 10 out of my 22 classes in my MBA. I raised venture capital from Lazard while I was finishing my second year of college. I sold it to a company called Hewitt in 2002. That company, in about 6 years, did about 30 crores in revenue. So it did well, but in my mind it was a dwarf. But we started Team Lease, which is about 5 years old now. We've hired somebody every 5 minutes for the last 5 years. Night and day, weekends included, and this year we'll close with about 700 crores in revenue. What has been the difference between the two? And when I reflect back, and I'm only looking back, and you must, there's the first rule which most doctors will understand, Dr. Chinnappa sitting here, you know, post-mortems have a certainty that prescriptions don't. So I didn't know this when I was, but looking back, the difference between a baby and a dwarf is really 6 things. They are in opportunity, they are in team, organizational design, strategy, risk, and resources. And I'll quickly cover each one of these 6 for you. See, the opportunity is very key. We have been lucky in Team Lease because you need a big opportunity. JYLF is not a big opportunity. We did HR outsourcing, so you can't put lipstick on a pig, right? As much as you want to. But in Team Lease, we are a child of India's 5 labor market transitions: farm to non-farm, rural to urban, unorganized to organized, subsistence self-employment to wage employment, and school to work. So there are 600 million people who will make this transition. These are journeys to a better life, by the way, for most Indians over the next 10 years. And we are a company which is positioned for that, so we're lucky. The second thing you have to think about an opportunity is it's not always about discovering new lands. It is about sometimes with seeing new eyes. You know, what does Team Lease do? At our core, we're a labor contractor. There are about 1 million labor contractors registered in this country. But we looked at what a labor contractor does. And we are really a people supply chain company in a country where the people supply chain is broken. See, we are at the agony and ecstasy of India's labor market. I had a client, and the two extremes, I can give you an example. I had a telecom client shouting at me a few months ago saying, I need 500 salespeople, why aren't you filling them up? I said, your hiring standards are too high. We're doing it for your competitors. So he called me back after lunch and said, I need a pair of hands. I don't care if a brain comes attached. Because companies are just not able to find skilled people. But the other agony of India's labor market, we had a job mela in Jaipur. We're sitting here, he was one of the key organizers of that. And 35,000 people showed up in one day. You know, I was the only guy wearing a suit for 10 kilometers, so about 1,000 of those kids came up to me. And I can guarantee 800 of those kids, if they were born in Delhi, Bombay or Bangalore, they would have had a job. But unfortunately, they were born in rural India, Dausa, Barmer, Jhunjhunu, Shergarh, whatever place you want to make. And it's the ovarian lottery. You know, where you are born in India has such an overwhelming impact on where you can get to in life. And that is unfair. But that is what we've created as a massive opportunity, sabotaging the ovarian lottery. So we spent the last 5 years in the matching problem, which was connecting demand for supply. And now we will spend the next 5 years in the mismatch problem, which is repairing supply for demand. So my fundamental point is find an opportunity which is very large. You know, you're sitting on the nose of a rocket and the rocket takes off. Most people think they took off, but it was the rocket which took off. And that's really what's happened with us. The second important element of the difference between a baby and a dwarf is the team. And this is where most people go wrong. You know, entrepreneurship is a team sport. Most people believe it's a solo sport. Steven Spielberg was absolutely right when he said, you know, directing is 90% casting. Because the key part of growing a venture is putting together your team. And that has been the difference between team leads and India Life, right? In team leads, putting together your entrepreneurship team means you have to kiss many frogs before you find your princess, right? I had done my frog kissing in India Life, so I had a 1-year non-poach agreement with Hewitt. The day it ended, 29 people resigned and came over to team leads. And that is why we have scaled faster, because we've seen the movie before, we know how it ends. And that leads to another lesson which most people, when you come or when you're young, you don't realize. You don't realize that great orchestras are not made of great musicians. Great orchestras are made of ordinary musicians performing at their peak. And when you come out of business school, you choose biology over chemistry. Like I did. When I came out of business school, I used to think somebody smart was intelligent, was street smart, was articulate, was highly intelligent. As I grow older, you must always choose chemistry over biology. You know, people who get along with each other, people who realize that for you to win, the other person doesn't have to lose. People who get along, you know, because finally, school is very different from work. You know, I went to boarding school in Ajmer, and I just visited my teacher there, my math teacher. And I asked him, you know, you used to be so vociferous about academics. But as I've grown older, I'm not sure. I think temperament trumps intellect always as you grow older. He says, absolutely. So I was surprised. I said, why do you say that? He says, you know, in school to get ahead, you need to work alone. In the workplace or in the real world, you can't do anything alone. You have to get things done through other people. In fact, in school we have another word for teamwork. We call it cheating, which is kind of interesting. And I've thought back on that when sometimes we don't realize that when you get out there, the team is all that matters. And not only the quality of the team in terms of diversity of the team. You know, we all tend to like people or hang out with people who look like us, who think like us, who dress like us. But that is the fatal flaw in any leader. You must always work with people, hang out with people who are different from you. And most people have this problem. You know, even Akbar, who was one of India's greatest leaders, had a very deep management team, right? His Navratnas was a deep management team. But he suffered from that same fatal flaw which most leaders do. You know, he called Birbal and said, if you don't fight in battle, I will demote you from being a Navratna. And Birbal said, Jahapana, I'm a Baniya. I'm very good at what I do. Please don't send me to fight for battle. This is a true story. Please read the history of Abu Fazl, who chronicled Akbar's... So Akbar said, no, if you don't go and fight in a battle, I'm going to demote you from being a Navratna. So Birbal went and fought in battle, and his body was never